It is the 21st century, and yet despite all of our technology, Mother Nature still continues to surprise us. Despite all of our understanding of meteorology and all of our weather satellites, the predictions of your local weather forecasters on the evening news are still very often, well, wrong. And severe storms will sometimes go, well, differently than we expected them to. And despite all of our knowledge of things like plate tectonics and geological history, the prediction of things like earthquakes and volcanoes is still distressingly imprecise. But for much of human history, we didn't even have that. Natural disasters simply occurred without warning, without any understanding of why, an act of God that simply came and could destroy entire cities and civilizations. On May 20th, 1202, people across a vast swath of Earth experienced terrible destruction. It is history that deserves to be remembered.
The Eastern Mediterranean, encompassing much of many Near Eastern countries like Israel, Syria, Lebanon, Turkey, and numerous others, is an area with a relatively high risk of earthquakes, owing to a number of faults associated with the northward movement of the Arabian Plate. The northern movement has created a divergent boundary between the plate and the African Plate, where both plates are moving away from each other along the Red Sea. In the east, the Arabian Plate and the Indian Plate are separated along the transform fault called the Owen Fracture Zone. In the north, the Arabian Plate pressing against the Eurasian Plate has created the Zagros Mountains in Iran and Iraq. The most active section in terms of earthquakes is a series of faults just inland from the Mediterranean Sea called the Dead Sea Transform. Both the African and Arabian plates are moving in a roughly north-northeast direction, but the Arabian Plate moves more quickly, causing left lateral displacement as the plates move past each other. The movement has also caused a series of pull-apart basins, such as the Dead Sea and the Sea of Galilee. According to the Global Seismic Hazard Assessment Program, the fault has caused displacement of around 107 kilometers in the last 23 million years. The program summarizes that the region has been subjected to many earthquake disasters during the past 2,000 years. Historical evidence for earthquakes in the region goes back at least to around 1365 BC, as recorded in a text that says, Ugarit, city of the king, was destroyed by fire. Half the city burnt, the other half was intact, which corresponds to archaeological evidence of serious damage by earthquake in Ugarit. Many other earthquakes are recorded in the centuries that followed, such as earthquakes of August 22, 502, 678, 718, 847, 1091, and 1170, among many others. 1202 was an active year across the Mediterranean. Since 1198, Pope Innocent III had been pressing European forces to begin another crusade, and the army was finally gathering in 1202 to again invade the Holy Land. Saladin, founder of the Ayyubid dynasty of the Sultanate of Egypt, had conquered most of the Crusader states and retaken Jerusalem in 1187, but the Third Crusade was called to retake Jerusalem and recaptured significant territory, although it failed to capture Jerusalem. Saladin and the Crusaders negotiated a treaty in 1192, which brought the Third Crusade to an end, but Christian Europe had not given up on recapturing the entire region. Saladin's death in 1193 sparked a war between Saladin's son, but by 1200, Saladin's brother, Al-Adil, known to the Crusaders as Safaddin, secured control and declared himself Sultan. Between the Third and Fourth Crusades, several Crusader states remained in the Near East. The Kingdom of Jerusalem hugged the modern coast of Israel, though without Jerusalem its capital was Acre. North of Acre, the county of Tripoli controlled a small territory around the city of Tripoli. Further north, the Principality of Antioch was another small Crusader state, or outremer from the French term overseas. Numerous recent earthquakes had caused significant damage in the region, such as the 1138 earthquake near Aleppo, considered one of the deadliest earthquakes in history. Estimated at a magnitude of 7.1, the 1138 earthquake likely killed more than 100,000 people and devastated the city of Haram, completely destroying a Crusader fortress there. The city of Hama was hit 19 years later by an estimated 7.4 magnitude earthquake that killed around 8,000 people. The most serious was the earthquake in 1170, with an estimated 7.7 magnitude, causing significant damage and killing countless numbers of people, according to contemporary reports. Some of the same cities were again rocked by that earthquake, including Hama, Antioch, and Aleppo. On the morning of May 20th, 1202, at dawn or just before, the earth shuddered again in the Near East. In Cairo, Abib al-Latif al-Baghdadi awoke to an incredible shock, which he says lasted a long time. One chronicler says the earthquake hit the entire world in 1 hour. The earthquake and two later shocks shook buildings, caused doors to tremble and roof joists to crack, and threatened to ruin buildings in poor repair or an elevated site. In Cairo, al-Baghdadi reports no deaths, but Cairo was far from the epicenter. Modern studies have determined that the center was along the Mount Lebanon range in what is today Lebanon, running from east of Beirut south to Sidon. Al-Baghdadi also reports 2 letters from cities closer to the epicenter. Both accounts describe a long shock on the morning of May 20th, 1202. Hama, Baran, and Baalbek were especially badly damaged in the region, and 2 more shocks followed the next day around noon and 3 p.m. Another account from Damascus said that for an hour, the ground was like the sea. From Damascus, a letter details considerable destruction. The Great Mosque reported significant damage to the dome, 2 minarets, and crenellations along the walls. This is corroborated in another account from a man who was likely in Damascus at the time and who says that the dome split in 2. Nearly all of the houses were destroyed, and the Nur al-Din Hospital, built in 1154, suffered significant damage. One building was swallowed up as the earth was open. The letter claims that only 1 person survived the destruction in Safed, although that is likely an exaggeration. The city of Nablus was said to have been almost completely destroyed, and that not a wall remains upright except in the street of the Samaritans. Jerusalem, however, suffered nothing. The greater part of Acre was overthrown, along with 1/3 of the city of Tyre, both then under the control of Crusader states. Multiple accounts say that hundreds were killed in a landslide in the mountains when 2 mountains collapsed on top of each other. Nearby, Geoffrey of Donjon, the 11th Grand Master of the Knights Hospitaller, survived the earthquake. Geoffrey was in Syria at the time, along with a papal legate, on a journey to Antioch, attempting to negotiate a solution to a war of succession in the principality. In an undated letter to King Sancho VII of Navarre, Geoffrey describes damage across the region. In Acre, he says that some of the towers, the ornate royal palace, and walls were ruined, while Tyre suffered an overthrow of its walls, towers, churches, and houses. Similarly, Tripoli faced considerable harm to its walls and houses and death to its citizens, although it was damaged less than Tyre. Elsewhere, the towers, walls, houses, and fortifications of Arches were razed. Their people were killed and the localities are deserted. And several fortresses saw significant damage, a serious concern in a region racked with conflict. Antioch was shaken, but did not suffer damage to the same lamentable extent. While damage was widespread, the fault was located within Crusader territory, and it seems to have caused significantly more damage to the Crusader states than it did to nearby Muslim territories. One Arabic source specifically notes that the earthquake destroyed most of the towns belonging to the Franks. Philippe du Plessis, the 13th Grand Master of the Knights Templar, reported shortly after the disaster to an abbot in France. He specifically referred to multiple earthquakes and described the damage in detail. In Acre, walls and houses crushed many to death, while only 3 towers remained standing in Tyre. According to Philippe, the Tyrian walls were almost completely destroyed, as were nearly all of its houses. He also reports the complete destruction of several fortresses. At Chastel Blanc, he says most of the walls were destroyed, and the main tower so badly cracked and damaged that it would have been better for us if it had completely collapsed instead of being left standing in such a state. A chronicle from France, which possibly used Philippe's letter as a source, says that a terrible sound was heard in the sky and an awful rumble from the earth. He describes the same damage as Philippe, and that there were few coastal cities that escaped damage. An Arabic source from Mosul says that the earthquake was felt there, but the damage was light. The earthquake was felt for at least thousands of miles, with reports that it was felt in Cyprus, Armenia, and as far north as Azerbaijan on the Caspian Sea. Cyprus was hit by a tsunami, which threw ships onto the shore, although modern studies believe that it was not caused directly by the earthquake, but by underwater landslides. One source claims that the earthquake was felt as far away as Sicily, or even Morocco. It was felt as far south as the city of Kos in Upper Egypt. Death tolls vary widely. Several sources report 30,000 dead in Nablus alone, while others record a total death toll of 1.1 million. That larger number has largely been discarded by modern historians, as it seems to refer to the total number of deaths in the year, and in addition to the terrible earthquake, 1202 was hardly immune to other issues of the Middle Ages. In the same year, a plague struck in Egypt and elsewhere, and if that wasn't enough, the Nile was in a particularly bad period which caused widespread famine. The concurrent disasters were recorded by al-Baghdadi in Cairo, and the combined death toll seems to have been used by multiple authors in the death toll. Various others offer estimates from as many as 100,000 to as few as 30,000 killed by the earthquake. Historical sources largely agree on the 20th of May date, although numerous Arabic dates also suggest May 21st, which some researchers think implies that the Arabic calendar was slightly different than the modern one. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's Global Significant Earthquake Database estimates the magnitude of the earthquake was 7.6, with a Mercalli intensity scale between 8 and 11, between severe and extreme. Some experts have additionally identified a second similar earthquake in 1201 or another in 1203, although others determine that there remains no evidence of more than one principal earthquake. An illustration of the severity of the earthquake can be seen at Vadam Jacob Castle. The castle was originally constructed by the Crusaders in 1178 to fortify a vital crossing of the River Jordan between Acre and Damascus. It was unfinished when Saladin attacked in 1179. 800 Templars were killed and the fortress was completely demolished. It was abandoned by 1202 when the earthquake struck. Modern archaeological studies conclude that the remains of the castle were torn asunder by the earthquake and the walls were displaced by 1.6 meters. Destruction was heavier on the Crusader side, but Safaddin and the Egyptian Sultanate were not interested in taking advantage. Military tensions had risen immediately following an earthquake in 1157, while the 1170 earthquake was a factor in both sides accepting a peace treaty. In general, Safaddin was more interested in internal improvements and sought to avoid conflict with Europe and the Crusaders. The Fourth Crusade might have altered his strategy, but ultimately the Crusades struggled for funds and got caught up in a war in southern Europe until they sacked Constantinople and partitioned the Byzantine Empire.
The earthquake of 1202 is largely forgotten today, but it was significant, not just in the damage that it caused, but in the impact that it had on history. The Egyptian Empire was still busy trying to recover from disasters in the first decade of the 13th century, and now the Crusader states were forced to spend their time and resources rebuilding their defenses, and it likely played a significant role in maintaining the truce between the two. But for the people that were directly affected, of course it was a significant event. It impacted their lives in important and long-lasting ways. But there's a lot of events like that in history. Things that seem to be the most important thing that could ever have happened today are forgotten within a century. Shoot, that might be what happens with the events of today. And yet these events deserve to be remembered. And in this case, perhaps the greatest reason is because it could happen again. While there have been more recent earthquakes in the Middle East, there hasn't been a significant earthquake like the one in 1202 in the Holy Land for more than 1,000 years, in a place where historically such earthquakes occurred every 300 to 400 years. And so perhaps the greatest lesson of the earthquake of 1202, the best reason that it deserves to be remembered, is that some seismologists warn another one just like it is already overdue. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The History Guy. Check out our community on thehistoryguyguild.locals.com, our webpage at thehistoryguy.com, and our merchandise at teespring.com, or book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo. And if you'd like more episodes on forgotten history, all you have to do is subscribe.